It began with the sound of metal rattling in the dead of night, sharp enough to jolt me from sleep. My ranch dog, Ranger, growled low at the window, hackles raised, ears pinned forward. The moon cast a pale light across the pasture, and there she was, Karen herself, perched halfway up my fence like a grotesque gargoyle. One leg swung over the top rail, a flashlight clamped in her fist. Behind her, 3 HOA volunteers stood awkwardly in reflective vests, mumbling as she barked orders. She was trying to seize my land, physically, with her own hands. "Open the gates!" she screeched, her voice slicing the silence. "This property has been reassigned to the HOA Commons. Tonight, we take it back." Her floral blouse was torn at the hem from snagging on the wire, her sweat shining under the moon. For years she'd mailed me fines, threatened lawsuits, spread rumors that my ranch was unsafe and ripe for community use. But now she had escalated from paper tyranny to trespass. And she had picked the wrong night, the wrong fence, and the wrong family. I stormed out onto the porch, boots pounding the wood, shouting across the yard, "Karen, get down before you regret it." My deed had been proved time and again, the boundaries marked in county records, the fence older than the HOA itself. She knew she had no right, but arrogance blinded her as it always did. She waved her flashlight like a sword, declaring, "By the authority of the HOA board, this land is no longer yours. It belongs to the community, and I will enter it tonight." Her words drew gasps from the volunteers, who clearly hadn't signed up for a midnight raid. 2 of them shifted uneasily, whispering that this was a bad idea. But Karen snapped her fingers, demanding they hold the fence steady as she heaved her bulk over. She landed in my pasture with a thud that shook the dirt. And that was when Ranger, my canine, made his move. Ranger was no ordinary dog. Trained during my years in service, disciplined, loyal, a shepherd with eyes that glowed gold under the moonlight. He had been raised to defend, not to attack without cause. But when Karen's foot hit my soil, when her screech split the night air like a battle cry, Ranger knew the line had been crossed. He bolted from the shadows, his bark exploding like thunder, his body a streak of muscle and fur. Karen froze, flashlight trembling, before Ranger lunged, teeth snapping inches from her arm. She screamed, stumbling backward, tripping into the dirt. "Call him off. He's attacking me. This is assault," she shrieked, flailing as Ranger stood guard, his growl deep and unyielding. But he never bit. He cornered her, circling, forcing her to the ground as if pinning her with invisible chains. I stormed through the gate, heart pounding. "You came over my fence," I said, my voice low and sharp. "You trespassed and you threatened my home. He's doing his job." The volunteers at the fence gawked, unsure whether to help or flee. One finally bolted, sprinting into the night, leaving Karen screaming in the dirt. The twist came when headlights swept across the pasture and a cruiser rolled to a stop at my gate. The sheriff himself stepped out, drawn by Miguel, my neighbor, who had called the moment he saw the commotion. Miguel was there too, phone in hand, recording everything: the climb, the trespass, the screams. The sheriff's flashlight cut across the field, landing on Karen, sprawled in the dirt, her blouse smeared, her pride shattered. She wailed the moment she saw him. "Arrest him. His dog attacked me. This man is dangerous." Her voice cracked into hysteria. But the sheriff turned to Miguel, who handed him the footage, and silence fell as the screen lit up. Karen scaling the fence, shouting that the land was hers, commanding her cronies to break in. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He holstered his light, crossed his arms, and said the words I had waited years to hear. "Karen, you're under arrest. Trespassing, attempted theft, criminal mischief. And if you try to spin this into self-defense, the video says otherwise." The look on her face in that moment was something I'll never forget. All the smugness drained, replaced with a fear she couldn't mask. She tried to scramble up, but Ranger barked once more, sending her stumbling into the dirt until the deputies cuffed her wrists. Her floral blouse sagged, her hair a mess, her sunglasses cracked in the grass where they had fallen. She howled as they dragged her toward the cruiser, wailing that the HOA would have her back, that the board would sue me into the ground. But for once, no one stood with her. Her volunteers had scattered. Miguel's camera had the truth, and the night air was heavy with justice. News of the raid spread by dawn. Miguel's footage went viral before breakfast, shared across every community board and local station. Neighbors who had lived under her threats for years now saw her crawling in the dirt, screeching as she was cuffed, cornered by my K9. They laughed, they cheered, they cried with relief. Karen wasn't a queen anymore, she was a thief caught red-handed, humiliated on the stage she had built for herself. But the scandal cut deeper than embarrassment. The county opened a full investigation into the HOA, uncovering years of fraud, fines issued without cause, money funneled into Karen's personal accounts. Her midnight raid had cracked open the dam, and the flood drowned every ounce of power she once had. The HOA collapsed in weeks, its bylaws shredded, its members scattered. And me? I rebuilt the fence, stronger, taller, a line no one would cross again. Ranger lay at my feet as I hammered new boards, his steady eyes watching the horizon. My land was safe, not because of the sheriff, not because of the courts, but because we had drawn the line and stood firm. Now, when people drive past the gate, they see a new sign nailed to the post, private property guarded by truth. And sometimes, when they ask why the trails are closed, why the fence is high, I tell them the story. About the night Karen scaled the fence to steal what wasn't hers, and how she left in cuffs, her empire crumbling around her. The following days felt like stepping out of a storm cellar after the tornado passed. The air was different, still heavy, but clearing. Karen's raid on my fence wasn't just another petty skirmish with HOA bylaws, it was the breaking point. The moment her arrogance shattered under the weight of truth. Yet even as she sat in the county jail, cuffed and humiliated, I knew better than to think she would stop fighting. Karen had always believed herself invincible, and people like her don't surrender quietly. The news clip of her scaling my fence and screaming about reclaiming community land played on repeat across every local station. Social media turned her into a parody. Memes spread like wildfire, her frozen mid-climb with captions like, Mount Karen, gifs of Ranger barking with the subtitle Air Defense Engaged, and screenshots of her face as deputies dragged her away. But behind the laughter was outrage. People realized that if she could try to seize my ranch, she could try to do the same to anyone. Neighbors who had once tiptoed around her fines and threats began to talk openly, trading stories of harassment, of bogus violations, of money siphoned into shadow accounts. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. Paul, one of her oldest allies on the HOA board, knocked on my door one evening with a box under his arm and shame in his eyes. I can't carry this anymore, he said, setting it on my table. Inside were ledgers, emails, handwritten notes, evidence of years of Karen's schemes. False violations, inflated invoices, fines that never made it to HOA accounts but somehow ended up in hers. She threatened me too, he admitted, voice cracking. Said if I didn't sign off, she'd ruin me. But she's ruined us all anyway. The sheriff took the evidence that night, and by morning, the county prosecutor had filed new charges. Not just trespassing, but fraud, embezzlement, racketeering. What began as a fence raid spiraled into a full-scale takedown of the HOA empire Karen had built on lies. But Karen wasn't done clawing. At her arraignment, she tried to twist the narrative, standing in court with her blouse wrinkled and her voice sharp, insisting she was the victim of a smear campaign. She pointed at me, calling me a dangerous vigilante with a trained attack dog. She accused Miguel of doctoring footage, Lydia of conspiring with the county, even the sheriff of political bias. Her words grew shriller by the second until the judge slammed his gavel. Enough, he snapped. This is a courtroom, not your HOA meeting. For once, she was silenced. The trial that followed became the most watched event in the county in decades. The courthouse steps swarmed with cameras, journalists hungry for updates. Inside, witness after witness took the stand. Miguel presented his raw footage. Lydia testified about Karen's falsified land claims. Paul admitted the financial fraud in detail, his voice steady despite the weight of his betrayal. And I stood there too, holding my grandfather's deed, telling the jury how Karen had crossed my fence and how my K9 had done nothing more than his duty protecting the land from an intruder. The defense tried everything. They painted Karen as a misunderstood leader, claimed the fence raid was an inspection, even argued Ranger had been trained to maul. But Ranger's veterinary records, his training certifications, and the footage showing he never actually bit Karen dismantled every lie. By the third week, It was clear the jury didn't buy a word of her story. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, the gavel struck like thunder rolling through the valley. Karen's face collapsed into her hands. The sentence was brutal. Years in prison, restitution to every family she had stolen from, and permanent disqualification from serving on any community board. She wailed as deputies cuffed her once more, her cries echoing down the hallway, not the shrieks of a queen but the sobs of a fallen tyrant. The HOA dissolved within days. Without Karen's grip, the board crumbled, and the county stepped in to return authority to homeowners themselves. The bylaws that had smothered us for years were shredded. The funds returned. The security team disbanded. Neighbors who had lived in fear finally exhaled. Barbecues sprung up where fines once loomed. Kids rode bikes without threats of citations. And laughter filled the streets Karen had once ruled with an iron fist. For me, the victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. I rebuilt the section of fence she had climbed, taller and stronger, carving into the wood the words my grandfather once told me. Land only stays yours if you defend it. Ranger sat by my side as I hammered the last nail. His ears perked, his eyes calm, the silent guardian who would become a symbol for the whole fight. The county honored us both at a small ceremony weeks later. They presented Ranger with a Medal of Service, calling him the K9 who had exposed an empire of fraud. He wore it proudly on his collar, his tail wagging as children gathered to pet him, their parents smiling in gratitude. It wasn't just about my fence anymore. It was about showing the whole community that you don't bow to bullies, no matter how loud they bark. Now, when I walk past that gate at sunset, the wood warm in the fading light, I don't just see boards and wire. I see a line that was drawn and held. A line that Karen tried to cross, but one she could never take. And I leave you with this, reader: was I right to let Ranger confront her, to stand firm and let her arrogance expose itself? Or should I have acted sooner to keep her from scaling that fence at all? Where would you draw the line when someone decides your land, your history, and your family's peace belong to them?